Okay, the goal in today's video is to talk once again about multiple representations of a linear equation. And so I'm just going to kind of go through these one more time. So we can have the equation itself, and that's sometimes called the rule because that's what we're following. My computer's going a little slow there. Okay. We can have a graph, and we can have a table. So let me demonstrate how to go from one to the other. Okay, so first off, if we have a an equation, here's my equation. Y equals 1/2 x plus 3. Okay, and I want to go to a table. So I want to get a table from this. All I'm going to do, draw my little table, and do. It's probably too many, but that'll work. And an x and a y. Okay, the x's are the numbers that we're putting in, the y's are the numbers that we're getting out. Now, because we're dividing by 2 or because we're multiplying by a half, same thing, I'm just going to choose to put in some even numbers, some numbers that divide by 2 easily. So if I said, okay, I'm going to put a 2 in here, then 1/2 times 2 is 1, plus 3 is 4. So if I put a 2 in, I get a 4 out. Let's try putting in a 6. So we put a 6 in place of the x. So 6 times 1/2 is 3, because it's 6 divided by 2. Plus 3 is 6. So if I put a 6 in here, I'm going to get 6 out. Let's try 10. So I put a 10 in. 10 divided by 2, or times 1/2, is 5. 5 plus 3 is 8. So if I put a 10 in, I get an 8 out. Now what happens if I put in a number that's not an even number? Well, let's find out. Let's put a 5 in there. So if I put a 5 in here, let's see, 5 times 1/2 is 2.5, plus 3 gives us 5.5. So if I put a 5 in, I get 5 1/2 out, or 5.5. Okay, try it one more time. So if I put a 3 in for x, so I go 3 times 1/2, that's 1.5, or 3/2. But 1.5 plus 3 is 4.5. So if I put a 3 in, I get 4.5. So I was just able to make a table. This is with 5 sets of numbers. And normally you won't have to go with more than that unless you were told to. But again, I just kind of chose what numbers I wanted to put in there. If I wanted to put some negative numbers in there, absolutely I could. Okay, so the numbers going in are the x values, the numbers coming out are the y values. Now, the last part about this is a graph. So I am going to make a graph. I'm just going to pull this little baby up and say I want a graph. Pull my graph over to here. And then I'm going to make this graph. Now, I can make this graph in 2 different ways. One, if I understand the equation of a line, I can just say, okay, the plus 3 means that that's where I start. So I could go up 1, 2, 3 and put a dot at 3. And then 1/2, a slope of 1/2 means I go up 1 and over 2, up 1 and over 2, up 1 and over 2. And I can make my line, not the best line in the world, but I can make my line just like that. The other way that I could have done it is by looking at my table and just choosing some of the points off of that. So the first point that I have on my table is 2, 4. So go over 2, up 4, and oh, that one's right there. 6, 6. So let's see. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Up 6. Oh, and it's right there. And so I can just use these points, the 5, 5.5, which will be this one right here, and the 3.5, which would be that one right there. And I can use those to make my graph also. Okay? Now, if I started off with a graph, let's start off with a graph on the next one. Let's say I start off with a graph and just blip. Okay, so there's my graph. I'm going to bring it down right there. And I see that it goes through this point and then it goes up just like this and down just like this. All right, not the straightest thing in the world, but you get the idea. So now we want to go to a rule / equation and a table. Well, we can do that just as easily. We can say, oh, well, we're going through at -4, and we have a slope of up 1 and over 1, so up 1 and to the right 1. So that's a +1 over 1. So our equation will be y equals 1x, or just x. If you put a 1 in there, that's okay too. And then a -4. So there's our rule or our equation. Now for our table, I'm only going to do a few of them this time. X, Y. So we just pick where some points are. So I can pick a point. There's a point, there's a point, there's a point. So I can pick any of these. So let's do, let's say we go over 1 and we got to go down 3. So 1, -3 is a point. 2, -2 is a point. And we'll do the one, we go over 4 and 0 is a point. So it's just the intersections along my graph. It's the places the line goes through. Now, if you had the equation already, you could have always used the equation to fill in your table as well. Because if we took a 1 and we put it into this equation up top, let's see, we put the 1 in for x, so 1 minus 4, oh, -3. We got that. Let's try a 2. We put a 2 in there, 2 minus 4, yep, -2. We put a 4 in there, 4 minus 4 is 0. So that's another way that we can fill in our table. Okay. Now, if we started off with a table, we could always just make our graph and then make our equation. And that works out really well that way. So now you should be pretty comfortable with going between an equation / rule, a graph, and a table. And it's all about just being able to plug numbers in. All three of them use X and Y. And they're interchangeable because they all mean the exact same thing. Okay? We'll see you in class.